Hey everyone, this is my summary video for my final scene. So here's what I've set up. I have 4 different textures, or 4 different graphics objects. So this pyramid in the center here is a shader with a graphics object that is just color. The skybox is set up with the shader texture with no lighting effects applied to it because I didn't want lighting to affect my skybox. The terrain, as you can see, is a graphics object light with texture, and then each of these individual sphere triangles, if I can catch up to one, is affected by lighting. So this is a better example. It's taking the light better. And so as you can see, I've set up a mirror, and the mirror is reflecting everything in the background. I've set up something cool. I think this flashlight, as you can kind of see, being reflected in the mirror. Pay attention to like close to the mirror. The camera, the information I'm using to reflect it, gets a little messed up when um, when I move around. So sometimes you might see it like jump around crazy. And here is a model that I made. You can see the lighting effects, or I didn't make this, but I imported it. This is, as you can see, the colors reflecting off the mirror. The mirror kind of has a blue tint to it, so it looks a little different. But you can see the guy kind of, like he's yellow now, and he's yellow reflected in the mirror. See like the eagle is reflected in the background, a nice cool silhouette. And then there are in fact things behind the mirror. So here's a couple, objects with textures. It's the same cube with textures. There is a fog effect applied. So those kind of with the terrain will fade away into the background color. All kind of fade away, except if they have light on them. And you can see I have multiple point lights kind of rotating around. And then I placed an object to where the point light is located and put it that color just to kind of give you a visual, and you can see and then here's my eagle. So I will show you the code. So we come in and we're initializing all our, actually I'll show you so we're starting out, we're creating the right context for rendering. Rename this to work better with the mirror from the mirror demo because we needed to find that our models are going in the right direction, the winding. And then here we're creating our shaders. So we create the shader color light that I talked about earlier and the graphics object light. So these are the color light, and then we're importing our models. So these are going to be the pre-made models. the box, the sphere, and the pyramid. We're creating the light texture model. So for graphics objects, we're going to use these box models, sphere model and pyramid model, to fill these graphic objects and these graphic objects. And then, we're bringing in different textures, create texture, which you saw on the models, and then graphic object color. So there's this skybox shader, which is just a shader with texture. Yeah, this shader color. So these two shaders are working without lighting. And then here's a shader color light texture with, and then we create like the train texture, train model, um, graphic object light, and then we define, some of to make it easier, we define the point light positions, which we use in the DX app. So then when we come in here, here's my mirror. So we create the mirror. I'll show you that. So when we come in, we create the stencil state, and then we're creating the depth stencil, and we're creating the rasterizer state where the winding of the triangles is the opposite direction, and we're creating the blend states so that we can, make sure we don't render what's rendering on the other side of the mirror or what's rendering in the mirror. We're cleaning everything up. So then this is our API to kind of store everything. And then what we have is, so then we create our skybox, we're creating that texture, the shader without, affecting light. And here's the graphic object texture. So it's reflected too. And then here's the shader object color with light. So they're using this to create the terrain. We use this shader to render most of the objects in our scene, like the eagle and the tree, the terrain. Here's where we create the red, green, and blue pyramid. The pyramid. So here we're creating the models from our pre-made, and then so here's the red, the green, and the blue. We're setting these colors, and it just happens to be we could make these all spheres or models, just graphics objects. And then here's the same models, box, sphere, model, except using the graphic object light color with the color light texture. And then here we create the unlit pyramid that's in the middle that kind of acts like a light source. It doesn't, isn't affected by fog or any of the things in our scene. We're updating the position of the lights as we go. And then here we get, kind of the camera information. We use that to do some of the reflection math. And then we send each shader that we've created. So the skybox shader, which is a shader with texture, no light. Here's color light texture, so texture with lighting, without lighting, with lighting. So we send the camera information to those. And then, so in our API, how we do it is we start the reflection, which sets the right states we defined in the constructor. So we start marking the pixels, marking the mirror pixels. We set the right blend state and depth stencil states. And then we render the mirror. So now we're ready after we call this function to render the reflected object. So what we do is we call pmirror.getReflectionMatrix after we start the reflection. And then for each shader, we need to reflect the light. So we reflect the light position. And then we have to figure out, what are the lights looking at, minus, we reflect basically both positions, and then the vector between those two positions gets us, the direction of the spotlight. This is the same for the camera. And then here's where we're getting the position light, creating that with a matrix trans. So when that's updated in the update, then, these positions are a different spot. Same for, where the point lights are here. We are managing, as you can see here, 0, 1, 2. So each of the spotlights is just indexed. There's just an array of 3 point lights that's sent via the constant buffer. So that's the relevant shader file. So I think color light texture has a constant buffer with an array of 3 point light, equivalent to what we define in the shader. So we're basically, we're doing reflection matrix of the position of all these different objects that we've rendered in our scene, and then we render them so that and then we render them normally, so we render all the reflected, so that's everything that shows up in the mirror. So we've stopped reflection, we return the state back to where it should be, set the right depth stencil state, blend state, and then we return it back to, one thing I didn't show was this mirror saves, this is a naming from what we've defined, but this rasterizer state could be, anything to what the scene was before. So the mirror, we've defined a rasterizer state for our application in general. So if we go to when we created the mirror, so this front face was defined in our initialization. So here, so we define the way the vertices are supposed to wind, and then we have to make sure that, we clear the depth stencil view of the OR of the depth in the stencil. Otherwise, this doesn't work. So yep, I'm still rendering. I'm setting the shader up, and then that shader is used by these models. So I call render on these different objects that I've set up, and it sets it up with the right textures. I'm kind of putting their worlds back because when I set their world, when I reflect them to the basically reflection matrix times what they are in the actual scene, so they get rendered correctly. So everything is, using graphics objects. What else could I show you? Let's see. So skybox train. Got our mirror. I think that is it, and I'll show you my scene once again now that you've kind of seen everything. So here's my mirror, it's rendering everything. my light attached to my camera. Thought that was pretty cool. I guess I could show you the graphics object. I think I showed you that super in depth. So here's the one for the color. It's working with meshes. Oh, that's something I didn't show. I don't think I have any objects that are using meshes, but I am, it's running through when the model is created. It is creating the meshes when I threw this function, and the mesh data is in there, and all the graphics objects are correctly handling the mesh. So I have an array of colors for this, for the light. I have an array of colors, but it just reacts with light. For the textures, I have an array of textures. All my models are pretty simple, so I didn't need to use that. But it is working. What else? Oh, my fog effect. This is something I showcased in my previous demo, but how I'm accomplishing my fog effect is, so there's my constant buffer, and this I define to be -1, and that's kind of my magic number toggle to let me know if I want to render this with the fog or not. So then here's where I compute the fog. I bring in the camera position of the object, and then the color twice, so on's an out. So basically what I can do is if it's -1 or negative in general, if the fog range is negative, then it's ignored and the color just goes right out. So I bring it in and then I send it out. And so in my shader, and this is the same throughout all the objects, that just my color, light, texture, and my color selected 3D are the ones that have this set up, and I compute the fog, so that way, if the fog range is negative, then there's nothing for it to, it doesn't affect the scene. And so I call that on my objects. No, it's when I initialize them. So yeah, I said, for the color light shader, I'm sending the fog parameters for it to start around 50 meters and end around 750. That's why you don't see it very much. Same for the color light with texture. If I were to turn those off, I'm going to have to color light, fog parameters. Okay. So okay. So I turn those off, so then there shouldn't be any fog on my objects. So whereas before you could kind of see this like definite kind of darkening, especially as I went up like this. Now you don't see it, and I'll turn it back on just so you can see it. So yeah, you can already see it pretty distinctly. So yep. So that is my project. I hope you liked it. Thank you.